OCO relatives, welcome to our first episode of On Sacred Ground, an Indigenous Peoples Knowledge Community, or IPKC podcast. My name is Dr. Tiffany Smith, and I serve as the current IPKC chair and will be your host today. I use she, her, hers pronouns, and I am a citizen of Cherokee Nation and a descendant of Muskogee Nation of Oklahoma. I want to acknowledge that the land where my feet are planted today are on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded homelands of many Indigenous and tribal nations. 39 sovereign tribal nations call this territory home in what is now known as the state of Oklahoma. My home sits on the original homelands of the Comanche, Kiowa, Osage, and Wichita and affiliated tribal nations. I also want to acknowledge the forced removal, genocide, white supremacy, and systems of oppression that have dispossessed Indigenous peoples of their homelands. I recognize this often hidden truth and assume the responsibility as a guest on this land to educate myself and others on the Indigenous histories and importance of the land and water we are benefiting from today. Wado, thank you all. So today we are excited to welcome our two special guests for our first episode entitled IPKC's Creation Story. We have Irvin Harrison and Dr. Stephanie Waterman here as guests for our first episode. And briefly before I introduce our amazing co-guest, I did want to share the purpose of our podcast, since this is new and exciting initiative from the IPKC. So this podcast is here to empower, affirm, and center Indigenous peoples and ways of knowing in higher education, while raising awareness for equity-grounded approaches and socially just practices that support the holistic being of Indigenous students, colleagues, and community members. All right, so I wanted to share about our host, Irvin and Dr. Waterman, who are co-authors of the 2017 article in the Journal of Student Affairs and Practice entitled Indigenous Peoples Knowledge Community, or IPKC, Self-Determination in Higher Education. This article describes the ways the members of the IPKC have indigenized their knowledge community through community cultural wealth, Indigenous knowledge systems, and relationality. In this article, evidence of the IPKC's impact on Indigenous visibility in higher education is presented. And if you have not had a chance to read this, I highly encourage you to Google this amazing article that talks about the foundations of the IPKC and the importance of its space and place within this professional association and other professional associations that may have similar organizations. And I do want to mention that Irvin and Dr. Waterman that are here with us today were both former leaders and are co-founders of IPKC in its earliest days. And so we are so grateful to the path that they have provided for each of us that have been involved with IPKC in the past, present, and that will be in the future. So thank you all so much for all that you've done. I'm going to give a quick overview and introduction of each of our guests, and then also allow them to share a little bit about themselves as we get going here. So I'm going to start with Irvin Harrison. Irvin is Diné or Navajo. He served as the inaugural national chair of NASPA IPKC. Irvin was introduced to student affairs as a NASPA undergraduate fellow while at the University of New Mexico, mentored by Laura Valdez, Director of University Advisement at UNM. Irvin received his master's degree in adult post-secondary education with a specialization in student affairs from San Diego State University. He received his bachelor's degree in English, technical and professional writing from the University of New Mexico, where he graduated with honors distinctions cum laude. Baccalaureate honors and magna cum laude, university honors. That's awesome, Irvin. Irvin has worked in higher education for many years, always preferring to work directly with the students to support their academic endeavors, student leadership and campus involvement, community outreach, and graduating with their college degree. Irvin was an academic advisor at S.1 College and previously coordinator at Cal Poly Pomona and director at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. He advised Native American students during their undergraduate education tenure, planning cultural programs and events, and worked with the missions on outreach and recruitment. He has taught in the American Studies program at South Dakota State University. Welcome, Irvin. We're excited to have you.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. Next up, I want to introduce Dr. Stephanie Waterman, who is Onondaga Turtle Clan and serves as Associate Professor at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education at the University of Toronto in Leadership, Higher and Adult Education, where she coordinates the Student Development, Student Services, and Higher Education stream. She researches Indigenous student experiences and associated support units and is currently using critical geography to do so. She is a co-editor with her colleagues, Dr. Heather Schotten and Shelley Lowe of Beyond the Asterisks, Understanding Native Students in Higher Education in 2013, and Beyond Access, Indigenizing Programs for Native Student Success in 2018. She is currently working on an edited book with Dr. Charlotte Davidson, who also is a former IPKC co-chair, tentatively titled Indigenous Practices in Higher Education Classrooms. Welcome to our guest, Irvin and Dr. Stephanie Waterman.
Yeah, thank you.
I wanted to give you all a chance to say hello to our guest and center perhaps where you are and any other things that you would like to share at this time.
Hi, good morning, everyone. It is definitely a pleasure and an honor to be part of this inaugural podcast, and definitely alongside an esteemed colleague, scholar, researcher, Dr. Stephanie Waterman. And Dr. Smith, thank you to you and your team for creating this new platform to share our knowledge and to create more vision for IPKC. So my name is Irvin Harrison. I am Navajo. Originally from the Disney area here in the east side of New Mexico. My maternal clan is Minihogans, and born for the paternal clan, Red Bottom. All of my family are from this area, and all have passed from this area. So it's definitely coming home was a good experience. I've been away for a long time pursuing my career and such. Came home to help out family. So NASPA has been a great platform to build my professional development and to meet a lot of just awesome Indigenous colleagues, professionals and researchers. And, I can't believe it's been 17 years since the founding of IPKC. As I was doing some research, I'm like, what the heck? So now I'm in elder status. When we had this last strategic planning meeting, being referred to as an elder was a new experience, but I appreciate that, and it is an honor to be noted as one. I've been helping family for the last year or so. The pandemic definitely turned life upside down for me and probably everyone else around the world. But before that was, working on teaching at American Indian Studies at San Diego State University. I know Dr. Smith, you said South Dakota. Those two get mixed up all the time, SDSU. But at San Diego State, I was also teaching in American Indian Studies and also taught for the education program there. So I kind of dabbled on the academic and the student affairs. All of it has been nurturing. And now as I return to it, as we were talking, Dr. Smith, trying to figure out what is my next step and how can I continue to work directly with students. So that's kind of who I am at this point. My partner, Travis, and our kiddos, Maxwell and Leonardo. We're here still thriving and surviving and look forward to getting back on our feet after taking care of family. But thank you again for this opportunity to be part of this conversation. Go ahead.
I have to ask, how old is Leonardo now? Leonardo.
He is 16 years old. Leonardo DiCaprio is his full name. So he's 16. Yeah, he was a rescue. I guess that's the other thing I failed to mention. What's been helping us here is we've been very involved in animal rescue work, rescuing reservation animals, dogs and cats from the Navajo Nation. And it just has been fulfilling that we can take these abused, neglected animals and they get their freedom ride or freedom flight out of here to places where they can have their forever home. So it's a new perspective on our four-legged relatives, as we call them, and the need that they have. And again, reassuring that we're still able to do something while we're here. But yeah, Leonardo is 16. Maxwell is 9 years old now. So that's my family. Thanks for asking, Stephanie.
Yeah, I know they're important. So, Niwahascanyo. I'm Stephanie Waterman. I'm Onondaga Turtle Clan from the Onondaga Nation, which is the home, the political seat of the Haudenosaunee. So my people are called the people of the hills, which is the very descriptive word for where I live. It's very, very hilly. And the last two places I've worked is very flat. So I don't really know how that happened. I greet you in peace and good intentions from the lands of the Huron-Wendat, the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe lands in this area of Dagarando, also known as Toronto in Ontario, Canada. This is a meeting place of many Indigenous peoples for a very long time where all these waters meet. So a place of trade and fishing and that kind of thing. So there's quite a large Indigenous population here. I also want to thank you for including me in this podcast, which I think is a great idea, and I can't wait to see other ones that follow. I think this is part of not a set goal of when we started out, but this visibility and for Indigenous scholars and practitioners to talk about our work. This is a good product of our vision from the beginning, even though we didn't say it. My experience with NASPA is when I was at Syracuse University working on my master's degree, I did reports for the National Center for Education Statistics and the IPEDS reports that we had to do, and the NCAA, because Syracuse University is a Division I team school. And every year we did the report. I would just get so upset because in the 1990s, the literature was very negative and deficit. Native students go home. Like, that's the worst thing that you could possibly imagine. The federal cohort for the report was first-time full-time student who entered in the fall. And, we all know there's a lot of transferring and stopping out with Indigenous students, actually with a lot of students. So, we were erased by these reports. And like one year, the report had a little asterisk. Well, every year it had an asterisk that said there weren't enough Indigenous students to include in the report because there were only 8 that entered first-time full-time student in the fall. And I personally knew 12 because they had transferred in or part-time. So I did my dissertation on how Haudenosaunee complete college degrees. And I wanted to be completion, not say at being a senior or your last year, because I knew many of my friends who took a year or two off to finish part-time or were starting a family or a new job, and they might take more than four years. Most of them took about 6.5 years. So at my institution at Syracuse University, the faculty there were more involved in ACPA than they were with NASPA. And I didn't want to be with that crowd, to be honest. So I went to my first NASPA in 2004, which is where I met Irvin and Heather and George McClellan and Pam Agoyo. And we had community. You go to this, I think this is jumping ahead to our journey with NASPA and IPKC. When you go to a large conference, especially something as large as ARA or NASPA or ACPA, you look for your own people, somebody who's like-minded, right? So you go to their sessions. So you look up, oh, this is about Native students. I'll go to that person's session. And there weren't very many. George McClellan had one. So a bunch of people came to mine. Karen Francis Begay also. Yeah. And afterwards we gathered, and then we talked about going to dinner, and I think we met for dinner each night of the conference. And Irvin then thought, he saw, I don't know if it's right away or later, that there were the indigenous, the knowledge communities, and thought, why don't we start our own? So he really took the work of figuring out how to do that, and the rest of us just kind of filled in the blanks. Irvin, do you want to continue with this line here?
Sure. Yeah, so I kind of did what Stephanie did in finding those Native topic presentations and just looking for names. I had previously met Karen Francis Begay, who's now Dr. Karen Francis Begay. So exciting to hear that and to know that. I interviewed her for one of my graduate papers about becoming a director of Native American student programs. And that was my introduction with her. And she happened to be going to Denver. So we said we would meet up. And then we, again, strategized to find all the Native topics, and we found them. And there was this little group of folks. It was exciting. And, also met Dr. George McClellan at that time. And we did have dinner. And preface to that, my first NASPA conference experience was in 2001 in Seattle, Washington. And I was in the heart of the undergraduate fellows program, and my mentor, Laura Valdez, said, let's go. And you can see what student affairs is, and you can meet colleagues, potential mentors. And at the time they were networks. And so there was a Native American network, and they had on the schedule, they had a space, they had time. She said, there's always good food. So, you'll never leave hungry was the motivation, and also to meet people. So we went, and we showed up a little bit early. We went to the room, and then we waited, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, probably about a half an hour in. We're like, I don't know if this is supposed to be happening now. And that was the reality for me. That was like the aha wake up moment that we don't have Native professionals visible in NASPA. And I think Laura was also quite surprised because, she's been involved, and she said, this is an opportunity. So that was the start of kind of, all right, how do we change this? What can we do? And so I finished my undergrad, and then graduate school came about and got very involved in NASPA, and then the conferences, and then knowledge community, the networks turned to knowledge communities. And so I was part of that conversation. And yeah, we kind of dove right in. Everyone was working hard. Stephanie was finishing up her dissertation at that point. And I just said, you know what, let's just do it. And so, found what we needed to do and went and stalked people to fill positions. And we created our application. And it was challenging in different ways, but, we made it work, and here we are. So yeah, all started with a conversation at dinner. And I think we were all like-minded, and we all knew what we wanted and what we needed to see at such a large gathering. And that was Indigenous presence.
Yeah, and really strong allies.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you both for sharing a little bit about your journey to co-found with that small group of, the IPKC space that we're all benefiting from today. So I can't say enough about how grateful I know I am, and that members of the IPKC feel today, because we look to you all as our founding members and all that you went through to get this space for us. And I will say, now that you shared a little bit of your journeys, we'd like to hear a little bit about, what was the landscape of NASPA at this time prior to the IPKC, and the challenges that existed then that now have been removed with the existence of this space with the IPKC?
Well, I don't know if things have been removed, but I know we're more visible. And that 2004, where I met Irvin and Pam and Heather and Todd Wilcox and others, That was my first one. So maybe Irvin could speak to this a little more than me.
Okay, well, again, I mentioned previously that there were networks within NASPA that represented all the diverse populations of professionals and graduate students, et cetera. But also that wake-up call in 2001 of the indigenous identity was non-existent. That was kind of smack in the face. Okay, what happened here? But also opened my eyes to the potential that we would have to create that space. So different things were kind of working in that moment, meeting Dr. Waterman, Karen, Pam Magoya, George McClellan. The initial call to gather to talk about this application process was very energetic, and people were so motivated to move forward to create this Indigenous Peoples Knowledge Community. It was exciting. And also at the time was happening was kind of I don't know if it's the initial publication that started it all, Dr. Waterman, but it was that Serving Native American Students that was released from the New Directions for Higher Education.
Right, that was 1999.
That was out of University of Arizona with Dr. Mary Jo Tippeconic Fox and Shelley Lowe and Dr. George McClellan were the editors. And so we had this release, and it was, kind of the foundation conversation of what was happening with Native students on college campuses and in higher education. And like I said, the motivation, the energy was there. And so the application was going, this was out, and it all created this first educational summit at NASPA in 2006. And again, we didn't have to ask. People stepped up and said, how can I help? What can we do? And it just turned this to phenomenal inaugural gathering in Washington, D.C. at the National Museum of American Indian. It was, we didn't try hard to make it happen. What was challenging was finding Indigenous professionals to fill positions, because that's what was encouraged by NASPA leadership at the time. And as Stephanie had mentioned earlier, our non-Indigenous allies really stepped up, including my mentor, filling regional positions, filling these extra chairs. It was a lot, but we made it work. And I think that the energy from the get-go was so heartfelt and wanted and needed. And we're lucky to have Dr. Waterman, who is a diligent note taker. She has all the notes from the very beginning, and and with her, I always remember her words of, there's a story right there. Let's write an article, and that's what started to happen. And she'll speak to the publications that have come, that have probably been in the works, but also have come from these conversations. So it was exciting at that moment. A lot of work, but a lot of good work, hard work.
Right, it was a lot of work. I remember that there was one conference where the flu was going around. So we met anyway. It was probably 2007. Yeah. We were really close to submitting the application. Maybe it was 2005. But anyway, so I remember Todd Wilcox was there, and I think Karen. But I remember meeting at dinner to go over the final application with somebody on the phone, because people couldn't travel with the flu. I mean, it really hit us hard, I guess. But another indication of what the landscape was like before was how few presentations that were Indigenous focused were at NASPA in the 90s. So in 1990, there was one. And you think of maybe 300 to 500 program sessions at a conference. So there was one in 1990. There were none in 1991. One in 1992. There were none in 1993. Again in 1994, 95, 96. There was, 96, there were two, but the others had one. 1998, 1999, none. And, you think now we get a little handout with several, at least, and pre-conference sessions at the at the national conference. So, that's how it was before. We were very invisible.
When you all think back to, IPKC's foundings back in 2005, what was that original vision that you all had with that? And how do you think that's helped guide the KC and your work today?
That's a good question. And I took some time to really think about that. And I went back and looked through all the notes that I still have in hand and just thought about, and yesterday when talking with Dr. Waterman was just to create that space for our Indigenous professionals and then for our undergraduates and graduate students considering student affairs as a profession. And the bigger picture of just creating that Indigenous presence, within NASPA, but also at all of these gatherings that happen. I think the idea of land acknowledgement may have been part of that conversation, but to see it to come full fruition and knowing that it's happening, I really had this sense of colleagues and not at any fault of their own, not being aware of them being on Indigenous lands when they went to these gatherings and conferences, and knowing that there is history of Native Americans, of Indigenous peoples, wherever they may go. And so that was one of our I think, big picture things. And also to introduce ourselves and to become involved in the communities that we were having conferences. I think we went to Indian centers at some of these places. We met the people that are there doing the work with the young folks, as they're going through their education and such. So that we had a lot of opportunities, a lot of great ideas, and that just kind of built into the action that was happening. For me personally, I think one of the big things was to have that voice and to be at that NASPA discussion table moving forward. And it didn't happen quickly, but to know that, we have things that have happened within NASPA since then has been gratifying. Dr. Waterman was recognized with that research award. I learned just yesterday that Pamagoyo's on that committee within NASPA. My personal goal was to get someone on the board of directors that is Indigenous, that can be that voice for us. And, we still can do it. We're going to make it happen. And then creating the networks that had happened through ACPA, as a partner organization, meeting that group, having the gathering with them. The tribal colleges and universities became an outreach for us, and how can we work with them? And then just other national organizations that supported, Native students in higher education. So there was the conversation, and then the strategic planning kind of put into place some of these things, and knowing that there were term limits. By the time we started working on things, Karen stepped in as the next chair, and it kept going. In the meantime, the minute we became a knowledge community formally, I became the spokesperson for Indigenous topics and issues, and almost the expert at that moment. So conversations with NASPA in general were so many, and I had to pull in Karen and even at times Stephanie to say, hey, I haven't even really started working in student affairs. I need your help. So it was like, join me. And so we almost immediately became the voices for the group. And I also want to make sure that I acknowledge in that setting that we had our non-native, non-Indigenous supporters, and NASPA was a big part. Dr. Gwen Dungy was the executive director. She was fully embraced by creating this knowledge community. Dr. Judy Albin was director of the knowledge communities at that time, and again, very patient with us, knowing that we have a lot to fill in this application. Dr. Gorderman, Stephanie Gorderman was also involved, and bless his heart, Joey DeSantis was very patient with it, with what we had to do. Joey DeSanto, excuse me, but they were all committed to us, and I think that they probably were waiting and yearning for this group to come around, like all the other knowledge communities. But with each new leadership, I imagine, new generation of thought and knowledge is coming in. So podcast wasn't on my mind back then. It was just finding people to bring together and creating the platform for the Indigenous voice. So moving forward to where we're at today, to be involved with this podcast is a new experience, but a generational experience, I think, for me, as far as a new outlet for knowledge sharing. So a lot has happened, but I think we were kind of the big umbrella of what we want to see, and to see it come the way it's been going with the leaderships that have been part of the process has just been gratifying for me. So thank you.
I know for me, I really wanted that visibility, because when you argue for programming and support from your institution, they always want evidence. And there was very little evidence in the literature out there at the time that these centers, Indigenous student centers, were important to our students. Sovereignty, treaties, all of that there was very little of it. And, we always have the argument about, well, you only have 100 students that you're serving compared to the rest of the population. The more evidence we have, the more we can argue for support, even though I don't think we should have to argue for support when they're on their land. But anyway, that's another topic. So that for me, that was that visibility, the research, the publications, the presentations, always being visible. And, there are many more of us now in NASPA and ACPA and all of these organizations, and people getting their doctorates compared to when we started. And part of that visibility is the logo. So when we started, I think it was Karen Francis Begay who identified an artist to develop our logo, which is really, really cool. I had to dig around a little bit on the NASPA webpage to find it, but it represents us, 4 directions, how we are as Indigenous people. And we went ahead and did the logo and paid for it and used it, and then found out that we were supposed to have NASPA on a certain size when you use the logo. But, I think in order to get things done, sometimes you just do it. So, I remember Gwen Dungy loved the logo. And I remember thinking, well, if anybody argues about us using this logo, Gwen Dungy, Dr. Dungy loves the logo. So we got her in our corner. And we should really be making some more swag with the logo, because it's really awesome. But I think that, and that came from us too, nobody in NASPA said you need a logo. That came from us.
I love that logo. I'm just going to say, I know that's a big, that co-chairs, Dr. Davidson, Tiffany Kelly, and, our previous co-chairs, and then our leadership team now has been really pushing to bring back to the forefront, even though we have these logos we have to use, but also including our original logo that, you're right, Dr. Waterman, is us. I mean, it shares a lot with those 4 hands.
Right.
That are very, very important foundations for the IPKC and for us as Indigenous members in this association, and that remind us, they're good reminders of our creation story and of where we're going to.
Right.
So I absolutely agree that it needs to have more of a presence, and we're trying to do our best to make you all proud and putting it out there more again.
Yeah, Dr. Smith, I appreciate you saying that, because Gerald, I can't pronounce his last name, was the artist from that area where Karen works, and he really took to heart the conversations we had with him and what we were thinking of would be our recognition as student affairs professionals, Indigenous higher education professionals. And it wasn't overnight. He took time with it. He's very ceremonial in the process, and we genuinely wholeheartedly appreciated it. And I don't know if you had read the description. The description he wrote is what he said in prayer, and one of the pieces in that is technology, I believe. And so here we are with a podcast. He helped us, to put it out into the universe. And here we are with technology and such that is beneficial to us in different ways because, I was the old school. I loved the hard copy of information, It may be electronic, but I prefer to print on paper and have it in hand. But, he had a vision for technology as part of our purpose and our work. And I really think back to that, and that's gratifying to know that even he, as an artist, not knowing student affairs, was able to take our words and our energy and create what he did.
Yeah.
That is truly amazing. And thank you so much for sharing that, Irvin, because I agree. He already had that foresight to see where we were headed. And I think that's, what we do. I mean, as Indigenous peoples, we already are armed with these tools, for lack of a better word, that we know we have that foresight of what's going to be helpful to us and moving our agenda forward and supporting each other. And I think he absolutely had that vision. And I think you all did too. And, working with him on this effort that we still use. And I know that our Power in Place symposium committees utilizing as well as a part of its foundations and the aspects of the proposal submissions and all of the processes. So it's being put to good use and being centered in that way. To sort of, I see it as seeking balance, right? And I know that's it's our theme for Power in Place this year is the bringing balance back to higher education, led by Dr. Charlotte Davidson and Carlos Gillen with the Orientation, Retention, and Transition KC. So we're very thankful for great allies there to help us push this out through the symposium space too, and other outlets. So I appreciate you all sharing a lot of those foundational pieces that it's really exciting to see still being woven throughout our history and current day. And I think you all have really set that strong foundation for our community and many of our members to accomplish great things. As I mentioned earlier, we're all benefiting from these efforts. And, now I'd really like to pose the question of, what do you all see as the next greatest accomplishment or pathway for Indigenous peoples in higher education spaces, with this foundation in mind?
Well, I think Pamela Ogoyo is on the board, isn't she? Yeah.
Yeah, she currently is till this upcoming March. Yes.
Yeah. And we have Charlotte as the Indigenous Relations Advisor.
Yeah.
But I don't want these positions to be one-offs. Our population within NASPA and ACPA is growing. And I don't know if we need to be judged in the same way to be on these positions. One thing with, say, a scholarly organization like ASH is you're voted into these positions and your publications matter. A lot of our work isn't, as I don't know, I don't want to say valued, but it's not counted in the same way. The work that we do with students or communities, it's hard to recognize that when you're going up for a position that really wants to see how you've been climbing up the ranks at an institution, or your publications, or your work with these outside community organizations, when the work you might be doing within your own community, you don't get an award for that, right? And you may work very hard to get some students into schools that are not high elite schools, and yet they're getting their education and giving back to their communities. And those ways aren't recognized when you seek to be on a board or part of the leadership of an organization like NASPA. I think that would be the next accomplishment, is to have greater recognition for that type of work, so that we are always a part of NASPA's leadership, instead of here and there and one person representing all of us. We can't, we're very diverse. We're extremely diverse. And a lot of times I've heard people say, well, we had an Indigenous person at the table. One who may not speak up because they know they're going to be outvoted. Right. And I think we addressed that in our article. So that's what I see the next greatest accomplishment is where we're part of these organizations in order to transform these organizations, but not to be, oh, we have somebody here, so we can check that off the box, but to have a really meaningful relationship with leadership.
Yes, I think you reminded me of post the first gathering after DC, we had our little smaller group, sort of a strategic planning-ish type meeting at the University of Illinois with Molly Springer, now Dr. Molly Springer. There we talked through a lot of these same questions, it seems like, and where do we want to go? What do we see in the future? And how do we support, the basis being, how do we support our Indigenous students and their college going efforts? And I remember Dr. Heather Schotten saying, well, it depends. That was kind of the immediate, kind of gut answer. It depends on where we are geographically, who they are tribally, the institution itself. There are all these factors that come into play, and it's not a one answer fits all. And being diverse in tribal nations and identity and governance, we talked a lot about that. Sovereignty was our word at that time in that moment. How do we work with our tribal communities to support their students? And how do we get institutions to understand that even though we may be small in number, we're a large part of the identity of your institution? And how do we work that piece? And so that it always comes back to, it depends. California is very different, where I've been doing most of my professional work, than Illinois, where there were very few students. But then California has sovereignty, sovereign nations, many tribes there, the Navajo Nation here trying to do their own thing. So it depended. And I thought that was a really good way to kind of give some perspective to our strategy, our efforts and such. And so you made me think of that when you were talking about, the article and kind of the conversations that were had and where do we go. Definitely, I fully support, Stephanie's recommendation of being at the table, not just for conversation, but to be part of that planning for the future and such. The board of directors seems to be the voting governing board, and to have an Indigenous voice. But what does that mean, and how do we make that happen? It's a big challenge, but I think is one that can still be done. We've made a lot of great effort, and there's been change, but it's just a matter of who our leadership is, and maybe it's not being talked about now, but it definitely needs to continue. Dr. Smith, in your leadership role, that's probably one of the things that from the initial get-go has been part of it.
Thank you both. I think what I'm hearing is sustainability. Sustainability is extremely important, and all these efforts that have been done by so many Indigenous scholars before my time, during my time, and as you all continue to leave that legacy for us and perhaps get re-engaged with NASPA, how do we continue to sustain these practices that we've worked so hard to make gains, whether small, medium, large, for Indigenous peoples in these spaces that weren't created for us? How do we continue to sustain and make sure that we are not invisibilized? And I think, that should be alarming to any organization, institution, a professional space, whether small in number or not, when there's a group of folks that are not included and are made invisible, and that aren't, getting agency, right? And these spaces, I think that should be alarming, right? So I feel like that's a lot of what I'm hearing from you all in moving forward. And we're so grateful for these gifts that you've shared with us today, and this amazing article that I want to recommend and that will leave we'll leave a link to definitely on our social media and when this podcast is live for everyone to read and see. And I think you all left us with some great words in that article that I wanted to conclude with today, where you said,
if you give me a moment, sorry, Dr. Smith.
oh yeah.
One thing that I do want to also just emphasize, because a reality today, when I was speaking with Dr. Waterman yesterday, is a lot of these folks who were at the get-go are so involved in their research, the work that they were preparing for. But also we have a lot who are retiring. They're up in elder and retiring. So what the pipeline, I hope, is still in movement with the new students. I'm thinking about the NUF program. What does that mean? How do we truly make it indigenized, a comfortable space for potential Native student affairs professionals? I think the pipeline, even for the young professionals, I worked with students. My heart has been with students' work directly. Talking to them, they may be going into engineering or into business, but they also can still be a student affairs mentor because they worked in a student center, trying to have those conversations. And so, on the successes that we've had, the pipeline moving forward, creating that conversation with students about this is a legitimate and much needed profession, and just if it's not full time, maybe as a side time mentor, I think is another big picture goal that I will hope that will continue, after your leadership, ends and then the new one comes in, because we relied on a lot of good people who have been experienced in higher ed that are Indigenous professionals. They're, again, like I said, retirement is coming around as a reality. And so we want to make sure that we have these new folks, the young folks, considering student affairs. That was another thing that I thought of as Dr. Waterman was speaking. So thank you for allowing me to share that.
Well, thank you for adding that valuable piece here, Irvin. Thank you. I did, and on that same vein, I wanted to quote a piece from you all's article. And actually, I'm going to read these couple of sentences because I think it's all important. So while we have come from diverse tribal nations and worked throughout many public and private universities, we have come together and formed our own family of professionals. This approach keeps our spirits and energy moving forward with positive, healthy thoughts. IPKC is present to support each other as professionals and our students. We have become voices in our profession, knowing we have an accountability and responsibility to our communities, each other, the institutions where we work, and a spiritual accountability to creation. That was very powerful and impactful to me, because I will just say, without you all creating this space, I don't know that I would still be involved in NASPA at all. IPKC became my family from the get-go back in my first conference in Boston in 2008. And they literally are my family. The folks, Elisa, Tim, I could name everybody, Dr. Charlotte Davidson, Dr. Heather Schotten. I mean, now all these doctors, which is just amazing. I remember before any of us were doctors, just supporting each other throughout this time, and throughout our journeys in higher education or wherever our careers take us, even outside of higher education, but still nurturing that love for students and those that are coming behind us. And creating more access and opportunities. And we want them to have so much more than we have ever had, with each generation that comes. And so I just want to say again, Wado, thank you all for creating this time and space to share with the IPKC, and to share with me today too. And we're grateful to all the hard work that you've put into creating these spaces and having these conversations still to this day with us.
Right. No, I have.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I did want to, before we leave from this episode, again, send the immense gratitude to our guest. And also wanted to let you all know that there will be bi-monthly episodes on our podcast on Sacred Ground. The next episode will launch in early March, just in time for the annual conference gathering. So feel free to follow us on social media. We're on Instagram and Twitter at NASPA_IPKC. And we're also on LinkedIn as well, if you look for us. I did want to share one last announcement with our second annual Power in Place Symposium. There will be some webinars. There was one already that occurred here this last month, really centering tribal colleges. And next, we'll be having a couple more webinars coming up this next year in 2022, leading up to the conference. So we hope to see you all there. Widow, and have a wonderful rest of your day.